Hello, this is the Public Citizen Town Hall. We are currently dialing out to 60,000 of our members to join the call. Please be patient with us while we dial out. We'll start the call in a couple of minutes. Today we'll be hearing from Robert Weissman, Public Citizen's President, and Lisa Gilbert, our Executive Vice President. There will be 10 minutes from each person, an update about what is going on with our new administration and the new Congress. You can press *3 to ask questions for the second part of the call. You can do that on your phone. Just press *3 and a public citizen staffer will answer and take your question. Again, you're on the Public Citizen Town Hall meeting with Robert Weissman, Lisa Gilbert. We'll be taking it over to Rob in just a minute. And if you're just joining us, you press *3 to ask a question. We're up to 4,000 callers so far and still dialing out. We're 75% dialed. We've also got people calling in today. It's a really exciting day, I think, in our country. I feel so much better after yesterday. I hope you all are breathing well as well. So we'll get started in just 1 minute and hear from Robert Weissman, Public Citizen President, who will join us today to talk about executive orders, regulatory action, the pandemic, H.R. 1, democracy reforms, state of play in Congress, impeachment, and so much more. Rob?
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks all of you for joining us in this call. It is, as Amanda said, an exciting moment in our country's history. And in light of that moment and with so much open possibility in front of us, we thought it'd be a great time to reach out and have a big conversation with as many of our supporters and members as we possibly could. So today, I'll be talking to you along with Lisa Gilbert, who's our Executive Vice President. We're going to try to give you some broad sketches of both what's going on and how we see public citizen fitting into the new political landscape. As Amanda said, we'll together talk for about 20 minutes and there'll be plenty of time for us to get into some Q&A afterwards. Before I dive into things, I do just want to remark, I hope that you feel, as I do, a lifting of a weight, a persistent burden that we've all had to bear over the past 4 years through the heinous Trump administration, just dealing with such an onslaught of hate and cruelty and meanness and corruption and undermining of the best values of our country. I just think sometimes you were conscious of it and sometimes you weren't, but it was always there, and now it's gone. Now, unfortunately, we still have to deal with the weight of the pandemic, which is a comparable kind of omnipresent burden. But at least we now have an administration in place that's going to be serious about dealing with that and where we're going to have an opportunity to make some really positive change. So let me turn to a little bit of that topic. What I wanted to discuss was first what our approach is going to be, what public citizens' approach is going to be in this new political landscape. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of what we're doing with the Biden administration itself, what we see happening, what we hope to happen with executive action and some regulatory actions that are in the control of the Biden administration, irrespective of what Congress does, and then talk a bit about the pandemic. So those are 3 big topics for me, and I'm going to do them really quick just to help give you some slight insight into what we're thinking. Again, we can talk about it further in our Q&A. And then I'll bounce it over to Lisa Gilbert, our awesome Executive Vice President, and she'll talk about our work on broadening and making much more real our democracy, what's going on in Congress, very much in flux even as we speak at this moment, and what's going to happen with the impeachment trial of the former president, Donald Trump. So with that, just a few words on what we're thinking about the overall landscape. As regards the Biden administration, we think things are a little bit up for grabs. We're very encouraged when Biden himself and people around him talk about the big moment, the big challenges, and the need to sort of emulate the approach of Franklin Roosevelt with big, broad, and bold solutions. But we're worried about contrary pressures that come from Biden himself and from people around him and in the administration. So we think it's a little bit up for grabs, and how it turns out we think is going to depend in very considerable part on what we all collectively do. So in every way possible, we're encouraging the administration to go big and to go fast to deliver meaningful change in people's lives right away, starting with, but not only focused on trying to get the pandemic under control. We've been doing what we can to try to encourage smart picks for key personnel positions. The cabinet slots are all allocated now, but agency leadership positions are still open. Second and third tier positions are still open, and it matters a lot who they pick. That's been a mixed bag, but by and large, we're feeling pretty good about it. As we try to get them to do stuff, again, how much we mobilize, I think, is going to be the key. So the personnel, getting good people in is the first challenge, and then we've got to push them, enable them, and give them the freedom to do the right things, the big things, and the bold things. We were encouraged by much of what we've seen, what we saw yesterday from the new president, and now also today, with a whole series of executive actions and executive orders that President Biden signed, more than any president has signed on the first day. You know, he did some things to just undo some of the damage that Trump inflicted on us, removing the Muslim ban, undoing some of the preposterous and deadly deregulatory policies that Trump had put in place. He pretty boldly has pulled the plug on the Keystone XL pipeline, which we're very excited about. And he moved forward in a very positive way on one of our key priorities, which was an executive order dealing with corruption and revolving door in the government. That is, lobbyists coming into government or people from high positions going out and becoming lobbyists. That was a signature feature. Those problems were a signature feature of the Trump administration. And now Biden has put in place new rules that will really clamp down on a lot of abuses. And as we saw in the Obama administration, which was not perfect, but did very well in this regard, if you have rules and you take them seriously, you actually really meaningfully reduce the incidence of corruption, conflicts of interest, and corporate capture of agencies. So we're excited about what we think is a pretty significant win that we scored yesterday on a policy we'd worked on for quite some time. In addition to the to the executive orders and direct executive actions, there are bigger picture things that the cabinet can do, that the departments can do, that the agencies can do through formal rulemaking, the issuance of regulations. There's a process to do that, and it takes time. But we are encouraged by some things we've seen, and we're going to push really hard on this. Lisa's going to talk in a few minutes about what's going on in Congress and the challenges we face there, as well as opportunities. But there is a lot more freedom in these executive agencies for the Biden administration to do stuff. They don't need to deal with Mitch McConnell. They don't have to confront the filibuster. They don't have to worry about challenges of seeming to be or actually being bipartisan. They have authority on their own to issue rules if they choose to do it, and we're going to make sure they do. So we're very encouraged that President Biden has said he's going to direct the Worker Health and Safety Agency, OSHA, to issue a rule to protect workers from the coronavirus. That's something that we had really aggressively urged the Trump administration to do. Of course, they refused the most common sense measures. That's going to be one thing that is going to happen. We're excited about that. We're going to be monitoring it and engage with it to make sure that the rule is strong. But just to give you a flavor of some other things, we're going to be working at the Securities and Exchange Commission to make sure that they issue a rule requiring companies to disclose their political spending and also how, for example, their businesses may be affected by climate change. We're going to be working with the financial regulators to make sure they issue strong rules to confront the systemic risk that comes from too big to fail institutions. And we're going to be working at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is going to be headed by a good friend and an extraordinary candidate, Rohit Chopra, to make sure they issue very powerful rules to protect consumers, including from rip-off contracts that enable companies to use contract law to authorize them effectively to steal from small amounts of money from lots of consumers and deny us the ability to ever do anything about it in court. All right, real quickly, I just want to bounce over, the topic of the pandemic is far too big to just cover in a minute or two. But let me just say a few words about it before handing over to Lisa. And of course, we're eager to discuss this further with you in our question and answer period. What's exciting about the Biden administration is the sharp contrast in its regard to the Trump administration, where you've got an administration and a president that understands the scale, that is empathetic to the death and disease that's spread across the land, and that is going to accept and ratify and elevate the science that gives us the direction about what should be done, and is going to try to move with the speed and scale necessary to confront the pandemic. So we're going to be working with the administration and in Congress, as Lisa will describe, to make sure that we first deal with the health challenges, that we get the vaccine distributed, produced and distributed as quickly as possible, that we get funding so that schools can open safely. Second, we're going to be working on the economic impacts of the pandemic, which is really, it's sort of been this two-tier thing where people in upper income groups are making out okay. People in lower income groups, predominantly people of color, are really hurting badly. Still really severe unemployment and job dislocation, massive numbers of small businesses closed, and all kinds of derivative effects, including more people living without homes, severe hunger, huge impacts on prison populations, and so on. We need a lot of money and real serious programs done really quickly to address those issues, and we're going to be pushing hard for those policies. And then last, a huge priority for ours is going to be dealing with the global aspect of the pandemic and making sure the vaccine is available not just to people in the United States, absolute immediate urgent priority, but around the world. Because it is a truly global pandemic. People are dying, not just in the United States, and will continue to die around the world, even once the U.S. is fully vaccinated. At the current pace of vaccination, even optimistically, we might see poor countries waiting 5 years to get universal access to a vaccine. We have some global proposals that we're going to push hard to speed it up by a matter of years. We think U.S. leadership on this can make an unbelievable humanitarian difference, save hundreds of thousands of lives, and it's going to be a big priority for public citizen going forward. So with that, let me pause and pass it over to Lisa Gilbert. Lisa, why don't you take it from here?
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. I'm just really excited to be talking to everyone on such an important and monumental feeling week after a disastrous 4 years of Donald Trump, which included 2 impeachments, one ongoing that I'll talk more about, the pandemic and the fallout that Rob was just discussing, and just an uncountable number of violations to ethics norms, human decency, and the law. It's finally over. And the White House and both chambers of Congress now hold pro-democracy majorities, and that is going to shape the work ahead. So at Public Citizen, we're thinking about all of this and believe that it's just not the time for small and incremental change, but instead it's an opportunity moment to pass the kinds of sweeping reforms that the public has been demanding for a long time. And one area that they are firmly supportive of is bold action on democracy reform. So I wanted to start out talking about that. On the heels of a norm-breaking President Trump, our country really needs transformative democracy reforms that ensure that the American people will be confident in the efficacy of their institutions and that the government as a whole works for them. And in really good news, Biden made democracy reform a part of his presidential platform, and the House and the Senate have both deemed Public Citizen's priority package, the For the People Act, their first bills. They've named the For the People Act H.R. 1 and S1. And so now it's vital to hold the administration and Congress accountable to moving this legislation, to living up to their designation as a top priority. And it really does make sense that both chambers have expressed the importance of this bill. It's a moment where we have this acute crisis of confidence in our democracy, and the legislation includes provisions to make voting access easier, to improve election security, to limit secret political spending, to deal with gerrymandering, to create a small donor-focused public financing system, which would allow more candidates to run, to install new ethics rules for the administration and Congress, and much more. It's a really exciting package. And we are at a pivotal moment. We know we couldn't win this kind of reform, of course, under Trump. We couldn't win it under a Republican House or Senate, especially a Senate controlled by Mitch McConnell. Our path to victory required the moment we have now, holding pro-democracy reform majorities in all three branches, and we're here. However, there are still obstacles that we need to overcome before we can actually win this transformative democracy package. So I wanted to talk a little bit about state of play in Congress and particularly a rules reform change that we are seeking, which is essential to winning democracy reform. And that is the filibuster. That is something that needs to be eliminated or changed. We have gained a simple majority in the Senate, so we have 50 plus Kamala Harris, but not a filibuster-proof majority. Currently, most legislation, including a democracy bill like I just described, requires 60 votes, meaning we would need at least 10 Republicans to work with Democrats to win. And so if Democrats grow frustrated with any kind of blockade that Mitch McConnell is likely to lead, trying to stop important legislation like this, Schumer could get all of his members to get rid of the filibuster rule using this vice presidential tie-breaking power. So that is certainly something that we are looking to think about how to change. Another thing that we're working on as we think about moving democracy reform, when the legislation moved the first time last year in 2019 or 2 years ago, we knew then that, it wouldn't pass Mitch McConnell's Senate. And so every returning Democrat in Congress is on record in support of the reform package, but it doesn't mean that we can actually count on every one of them to vote with us now that they know that the bill could actually become law. So we have work to do to reaffirm support to make sure that every Democrat is aligned behind passing democracy reform and behind these specific policies. We want to reaffirm strong support of our allies in Congress and also push on the moderate and institutionalist Democratic senators that we will need to change the filibuster rules to actually move it the rest of the way through the Senate and get it to Biden's desk. So to persuade these moderate senators, one possible pathway, again, I'm just reading tea leaves, but one possible pathway is that S1 will move to the floor, be blocked by the Republicans, and this blockage, trying to stop such a populist, important bill like the For the People Act, will help to shift the perspective of moderate and institutional senators that support democracy reform, and that will lead to the removal of the filibuster. So that is one pathway, and one that many people see as plausible, that the blockage of the For the People Act will actually open up the channels to reform the filibuster. This is something that Mitch McConnell is acutely aware of. He knows that people want to undo the filibuster, not just for democracy reform, but for many other things that we'd like to pass. And he is seeking to protect it right now. As Rob was saying, there's sort of state of play craziness on the Hill right now because Senate leaders Schumer and McConnell have yet to strike an agreement on how to run their evenly split Senate. And as these conversations are continuing, McConnell has indicated that he's looking for a commitment from Chuck Schumer to preserve the filibuster as part of their agreement governing the rules for the 50-50 Senate. So this is certainly something that has never been demanded before, and it just shows how keenly he gets the threat of removing the filibuster for the passage of all of the progressive legislation that we want. So Senator Schumer told reporters on Tuesday, he's trying to come to an agreement with McConnell, but that the filibuster could be a big challenge. He certainly does not want to give away his leverage early and bow to McConnell's hopes of enshrining protection of the filibuster in the rules for the 117th Congress. The Dem caucus is united behind Schumer in pushing back on this. Even those Dem senators that don't yet know for sure they want to change the filibuster rules do not want Mitch McConnell to proactively take the option away from them. So this is, the sort of the state of play. We need a deal to just get the Congress going. Schumer also said to reporters, we've got three things we've got to do very quickly: impeachment, nominations, and dealing with COVID relief. So I want to take one more minute to talk a bit about impeachment, which is another thing that's making the beginning of this Congress complicated. Public Citizen is front and center on the work on impeachment. We ran the Not Above the Law Coalition, which was organized to push back on Trump abuses over the last 4 years. It worked on, first protecting the Mueller investigation and then on impeachment number 1. We are back in action now because, as everyone on this call knows, the House voted to impeach President Trump for the second time just before the inauguration, making him the only U.S. president to ever be impeached twice. The resolution passed 232 to 197 with 10 Republicans. The House has named their impeachment managers, and they are ready to move as soon as the Senate indicates that it is ready to go. So waiting on that agreement between McConnell and Schumer that I was talking about. The House impeachment managers are starting to lay out their strategy for the case they plan to bring against President Trump in the Senate. We don't know yet whether they'll be bringing witnesses or attempting to subpoena documents because they do want to move quickly. I think one important factor for this impeachment is that we know that there are anywhere from 17 to 20 Republican senators considering voting for impeachment. So this is the exit ramp for a lot of Republicans who are looking for one within their party. They want an opportunity to limit Trump's power as the whole GOP rearranges before 2024. So at Public Citizen, we are leading the organizing, working to push back, on any GOP opposition messages like, it's unconstitutional to try a president once he's out of office, which we know is not true. And the reason to fight so hard for this, beyond the need for there to be consequences for the insurrection that he incited, the attacks on our democracy, on our Capitol, is that if we are successful, if we convict Donald Trump, then he will be disqualified through an additional vote from future office by simple majority. And that is priceless. And so we are working incredibly hard, organizing over the next several weeks as this impeachment trial happens to ensure that we're successful. So I'll stop there. That is the sort of crazy lay of the land in the Senate and a little bit about our democracy priorities. Of course, happy to take questions about any of this or any of our other legislative work beyond democracy, of which there is a lot.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And for those of you who've just joined us, you can press *3 in order to ask a question. We've got thousands of people on the phone today, which is so encouraging now that things are better in our world and in our government. And so I want to go first to Edmund Boyle, who has a question about the USPS debacle, as he says it. Since Joy came in, that you probably noticed there are problems with your mail delivery. And I'd like Rob to address that, please. Again, press *3 if you have a question.
Thanks. Yeah,
Rob?
I know this has been an issue that's really motivated a lot of people. As I was saying, I know this is an issue that's really motivated a lot of people, both because of the concern about how undermining the mail service might have interfered with the election, but also because people just depend on the mail service as such an important part of their lives. So as Edmund was saying, Donald Trump appointed to be the Postmaster General someone named Louis DeJoy, who appeared to have as his mission the undermining of the U.S. Postal Service. We were co-counsel in an important lawsuit that put constraints on what the post office was doing that undid some of the harmful changes that DeJoy had put in place to slow down mail delivery and helped ensure that ballots were delivered on time first to voters and then returned on time to election boards. But there's an ongoing problem, first with DeJoy and second with the overall state of the U.S. Postal Service. DeJoy is not directly answerable to the president. The Postmaster General is answerable to the board of the USPS. So we need Biden to fill some open slots, but even then there's going to be a fight about getting DeJoy out. That's going to be an ongoing and persistent battle. There's a bigger problem where there's been factions, really Republican-led, aiming to push for privatization, to weakening of the Postal Service and privatization of the Postal Service. And there's some complicated features of this, but it's basically involved underfunding the post office and then making it pay for things that it shouldn't have to pay for. As the Postal Service has been hit hard by the pandemic, both because delivery people are getting COVID, but also because their income has slipped, there's a real need for more money for the post office as a part of these pandemic relief packages. We're pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to get that, and at least hopefully set the post office off on better financial footing. Beyond that, we're eager, and this is a priority advocacy area for us, to expand the kind of services the post office can deliver, including to provide certain kinds of banking services. That would be an income source for the post office, and it would also be a way to get people across the country access to banking services without having to pay rip-off fees either from traditional banks or from the kind of predatory lenders and predatory service providers that go after low-income people and really take huge amounts of their limited income in fees and fines.
Thanks so much, Rob. And now let's talk to Marilyn Goldberg. Marilyn, let's see, has a question about Citizens United, I believe. Marilyn, are you with us? No. Marilyn, are you there? Okay, maybe she's not on the line.
Amanda, why don't I jump on the question? Amanda?
Sure.
Why don't I just jump on the question? If Marilyn comes through, we can get to it. So Marilyn, I think the question was going to be around the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. That's the one that authorized corporations and also ultimately super rich people to spend unlimited amounts to influence elections. Today, as it happens, is the 11th anniversary of Citizens United. As you know, we started calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn that decision the day it was announced by the Supreme Court, and we've made amazing strides since then. We are very hopeful about getting votes in both the House and the Senate in the course of this Congress in the next 2 years on an amendment, which in the House is known as H.J. Res. 1, the Democracy is for All Amendment, to overturn Citizens United. We're not likely to get that thing passed by 2/3 in both houses, but we are making amazing strides. We're also working in various states to get support for resolutions calling for a constitutional amendment, and we think we're on the verge of getting Virginia on board, which would make it the 22nd state that has called for a constitutional amendment. So this is a long haul, not easy to win an amendment, but vital, because we really are going to have a rough time getting our democracy back so long as Citizens United is part of the equation. So it remains a key priority for us, and we're excited about the progress that we've actually been able to make with all of us together working on this, and think that the end point is closer to us than ever, and that we're more, we've made more than half the terrain we're going to have to cover to ultimately get this amendment enacted into law.
Wonderful. And now let's go to David. David has a question about moderates and Republicans in the Senate.
Hi, Lisa. Lisa, my question is this. Hi. Does a public citizen currently have solid influence with any of the moderate Republican senators who might be persuaded to flip on important issues we're concerned about?
It's quite dependent on which issue we're talking about. We have had ongoing communications with moderate Republican senators over many years on many different issues. I think we've made some inroads on some of the democracy questions, particularly things around protecting whistleblowers, thinking about making sure inspectors general can only be fired for cause. Some of the things that Trump really brought to light as abuses, there are many Republican supporters of fixing some of those problems. So I think on a set of issues, the answer is absolutely yes. But there are also many issues which have become, unfortunately, quite partisan, where even if we have the relationship, it's too hard often for the moderates to cross the aisle. So when that's the case, what we do is focus on organizing, trying to apply pressure back home using our organizing chops and the people like you all in the states to reach out to their own senators and apply the pressure to sort of soften the ground and make it easier for our conversations here in D.C.
Thanks so much. We'll go next to Arjuna. I hope I am pronouncing that right. Are you with us? Are you in North Carolina today?
Yes. Thank you.
What's your question?
My question is, what can you do for those of us who do not want to be vaccinated?
Sure.
Well,
Lisa?
well, first of all, it's not going to be mandatory. So if you don't want to be vaccinated, you're not going to have to be. But I will say that our view is that the vaccines that have been approved have strong evidence behind them. And the absence of having widespread vaccination in this country and around the world means the pandemic will continue to rage out of control. So we do favor, everyone needs to make their own individual choice, but we definitely favor generalized vaccination. I think it's worth looking at the data on this, but at the end of the day, this is going to be individuals' decisions to make.
Thanks so much, Rob. Let's take a call. Jordan, are you with us? You have a question about McConnell, I believe.
Yes, thanks. With McConnell playing rope-a-dope, we can't get committees formed, we can't get appointments done, we can't get the legislation, SR1, we can't get the impeachment going. Can Schumer, does he have the ability to just say, look, we have 50 plus Kamala Harris, we're setting the rules and we're going ahead? Can he just tell McConnell, because McConnell will negotiate to the end of time, obviously, that's what he does.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish that was possible. Unfortunately for some of these matters, it does take unanimous consent, which requires the leader and the minority leader to agree. And so, we're certainly seeing that McConnell's willingness to take advantage of this moment. We know, as always, he's sort of playing dirty tricks and using every inflection point to push for things that will entrench Republican power. And this sort of last-minute ask to entrench the filibuster as a part of the initial organizing resolution for the rules of the Senate is just that. It's totally unprecedented. Usually this is a 5-minute conversation where we set the rules, and it's never been sort of wrung out like this the way it's happening right now. I do think the fact that the Democratic caucus is completely unified, and McConnell is in a position where he is sort of quasi-supporting impeachment, and the Republican Party is badly dented, means that we will win this. There will be, I think, rules will be set, but the question is whether there's anything else we have to compromise on because of that, and how long it will take, as you pointed out. But I do think we will have the rules set sooner rather than later.
Thanks so much. Let's go now to Mr. Rosenthal from San Francisco.
Yes. Hi. I'm very concerned about the lack of available vaccine for those of us who want and need to have the vaccine. I'm 88. My wife is 81. We both have pre-existing conditions, so we have targets on our back. And should we get the virus, it's like a death sentence for us. So it's urgent, and we're not the only 80-year-olds. I'm sure or 70-year-olds or 65-year-olds. So granted, obviously the frontline healthcare workers deserve and should have the first priority, as well as those in senior residences. But the rest of us, the lack of available, I check every day for availability, and there's none. So
true. It's so frustrating.
I am concerned, and I'd like to know if there's anything that can be done to expedite the availability of the vaccine. That would be a godsend.
Absolutely, and I'm going to let Rob answer that one now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You're not alone, and it's an infuriating story. I have to say, in terms of your own personal situation, I can't really give you any guidance on when it's going to be available in your part of the country or in your town or so on. I'm sure you know that. As a policy matter, there are things that can be done. I think what we're hearing from the Biden administration, the new Biden administration, is some intense frustration in this space and in many others that the transition was wasted time because there was both an affirmative hostility from the Trump administration and an unwillingness to share information and cooperate, and just total utter incompetence. So what they're learning now, and this is, I think, like since yesterday, is they get full access to information, is that everything about managing the pandemic is a total and utter debacle beyond what was visible from the outside. So that's really bad news. I think what's good on the good side is whatever, fears and concerns we have about the Biden administration. I get frustrated when the president seems to prioritize bipartisanship and direct action, or worry about some of the corporate influences. Whatever those concerns may be, I have no doubt that they are serious about tackling the pandemic and doing everything that they possibly can. So they announced yesterday and today some important measures to speed production of the vaccine, which is the first problem, because we just don't have enough and we're not getting it fast enough. And then second, they're going to have a national plan and national systems to promote fair and efficient distribution. As you know, the Trump administration basically told states you're on their own. And I'm frustrated the states weren't better prepared for that because they knew it was coming. But I think what's been fairly pointed out is the same public health people who should be in charge of that or are in charge of that distribution have been taxed beyond capacity over the last year, in part because of the federal government failure and in part because just the scale of the pandemic. The biggest thing that I think the Biden people are doing right now is using the Defense Production Act, which is a law that gives the government, in the name of national defense or the security of the nation, the ability to order manufacturers to do things and provide material to the government in priority over other customers. So I think they're going to get all the supplies that are needed so that the two manufacturers we have now can increase their production. We're actually encouraging them to go further, really much further, and actually build new facilities. That the government should either build new facilities or commission other manufacturers to start producing. We think that could expedite production for the U.S. And then once the U.S. is fully vaccinated, we just have this global problem that has to be dealt with too. And there the demand is almost endless. We have 7 billion human beings who need it. So we think they made some important first steps in their first 2 days. But the situation looks worse than we would have guessed on both the distribution and production sides. It's going to take a little time to sort out. I would say, given what you're describing is, your personal profile, you should be, thanks for hanging in. You really should be at the front of the line. And I hope the local authorities can help prioritize people in your circumstance. And because we need everybody to get it as quickly as possible, but there does need to be some prioritization. I think you're identifying right the two groups that need it even before you, but now, given that they're mostly taken care of, you should be right next.
I agree completely, and our hearts were with everybody trying to get their vaccine right now. Let's go to Caroline Blake, I apologize, who wants to ask a question about the Dodd-Frank Act. Caroline, are you with us?
Yes, I didn't hear what you said, but what I did want to ask about was the Dodd-Frank Act. Remember, too big to fail, which was a joke. We have this same problem now, and
Sure.
Can I have some feedback on Dodd-Frank?
Absolutely. Lisa, would you like to speak to that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caroline. So we couldn't agree more. I think that in another moment of economic struggle, it is a perfect time to look back at what pieces of Dodd-Frank actually were never implemented. Shockingly, there are chunks of it that Wall Street lobbyists were able to push back on so effectively that we've actually never created the rules to implement pieces of the law. So that is a top priority for us at Public Citizen. One big example, there's a multi-agency rulemaking of Dodd-Frank, Section 956, if you're looking in the bill, which would require that big companies, big Wall Street banks, decouple executive compensation from risky behavior. So, clearly one of the core causes of the crash back in 2008 was that people, bankers and CEOs were willing to take big risks because it was going to give them a personal payout in their bonus checks. So to us, this is a critical rulemaking, which should have been implemented right after the signing of Dodd-Frank, but unfortunately it's languished for many years at this point. So we are telling the Biden administration in no uncertain terms that we think this should be a top and early priority, and for them to revisit it and get right on it. I think that's just one example. There are other unimplemented components, and then there are things that never made it into the bill. So, we are also paying a lot of attention to breaking up big institutions. Like you said, too big to fail. Oftentimes they never faced prosecution. They were also too big to jail. We're paying attention to whether we can get some new legislation introduced or new rulemakings to tackle some of those problems. So I think this is a very timely question, so thank you for it.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks to all of you who are on the line, still thousands of members across the country. Let's go now to Joyce in New Mexico, who has a question about our national parks.
Oh, yes.
Joyce, are you with us?
I wanted to know, I know that just right before he left office, Trump gave leases to oil companies and so forth for the Bears E Monument, and I know they've been doing that all along. Can President Trump, oh my God, no, President Biden, President Biden do anything about that, undoing these leases? And that's just one of the things he's done to attack the environment and not protect our parks.
Agree, and I know we all care about the environment on the call today. I'm going to let Rob answer that one. And are you there, Rob?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for that. It's an important question. I guess you're seeing it locally. I think the general answer is no. The leases already given out can't be undone. Now, as you're correctly pointing out, there were some that were done really in the last days, and there may well be some ability to challenge those because they were done improperly. We have not had a chance yet to examine that. I think where the better news is forward-looking. So as you likely know, candidate Biden campaigned that he would end new oil and gas leases on public lands, and we anticipate that he will adopt that policy in the next few days. It's been something that we've been increasingly working on. So that's positive. The last-minute ones from Trump, I think we're going to have to see. One thing about those is, it sounds like you're familiar with this. A lot of what they were trying to push out the door in the last minute of the Trump administration, the oil and gas industry decided they didn't want to take because it's really an industry on its heels. The writing's on the wall about the transition away from fossil fuels and to renewables and efficiency. And a lot of it's really sort of downsizing. Those that did enter the auctions for some of this land probably do not intend to develop it anytime soon, but are making a gamble. They can hold the land now and it'll be worth more later. So long as we keep pushing forward with the transition to renewables and efficiency, it may be the case they decide never to develop it, and we could avoid some of the environmental degradation, let alone the climate pollution that would result.
Thanks, Rob. Let's go to Anna next, who wants to talk about how we punish Donald Trump, which I think we're all eager to do.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Anna. So, we share your eagerness for this, and obviously the work that we're doing around impeachment is, first and foremost to demonstrate that you cannot act as he acted as a president, and you should not, if convicted of those actions, receive the perks that you get as a former president. Those things are, things like security briefings and, pension and the ability to set up a presidential library, among other things. Under the former President's Act, an ex-president is entitled to all of those things, but it can be amended. And I think that if Congress convicts Trump, which again, as I mentioned, is totally possible, there are many Republicans who are considering it, then I believe that Congress will absolutely strip Trump of those perks that he enjoys as an ex-president. And, at Public Citizen, we completely believe that he should not be receiving any of these benefits, and will work hard to make sure that that is the case, convicted or not.
Thanks, Lisa. Let's go next to Glenn in Chicago. Glenn, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Great. What's your question today?
You'll have to remind me of something, because at my age, my mind is slipping. I
think it was about the Mueller report and getting Barr to.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. It all comes back. Yeah. The question was, when the Mueller report came out as a result of years and years of hard work, Attorney General Barr had the effrontery to write what he presumed to be a five-page summary of the report, which should have been Mueller's prerogative to write, and to put that out in front of it as though that was the five-page report. Is there anything that the Democrats could do to disavow that five-page report, which was horribly inaccurate, and to instead request Mueller to write a genuine five-page report to substitute for Barr's phony one?
Absolutely, and I think Lisa Gilbert can speak to that. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I share your outrage, Glenn. I mean, it was appalling to see that proffered as the actual report and covered in the press the way it was, and it certainly caused people to misunderstand the underlying substance of the Mueller report, which was a huge problem at the time. We invested a lot of energy, with holding things we called Mueller book clubs to get people to read the full report and really understand his findings, which of course were far more dire than what Barr wrote in his completely inaccurate summary. So I'm with you. I think, in terms of what we can do now, could at any point a member of Congress can put forward a resolution, proclaiming something and then garnering support for it. So probably the best way to grapple with this now would be for a member of Congress to author a resolution disavowing the Barr summary and saying as much. I think we're in a slightly stickier position in terms of getting Mueller to do anything now. He's not currently special counsel, and so he's just a private citizen. So that would be more challenging in this current moment. But I do think it's an interesting proposition to think about at the very least, putting forward so that the annuals of history are correct, that the Barr summary was inaccurate and misleading. Great question.
Let's go to Ken Roberts, who's in Denver, Colorado. I think Ken is as heartbroken as we all are about the insurrection. Ken, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, thanks. Boy, we certainly have a full plate, don't we, those of us who believe in democracy.
Yes.
So comparing the events of the Black Lives Matter protests and the events of January 6th, it's pretty clear that the police response was radically different. And there's already some evidence that that's because there is sympathy for neo-fascists in our police forces, including perhaps even the FBI.
Right.
Any thoughts about what we do about that?
Yeah, I know that our president, Robert Weissman, has some thoughts on this. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. It is really troubling. I think there's a couple layers of it. I mean, one, apart from any collusion that may have occurred, as you point out, it was just very striking to see the treatment of the insurrectionists by the police when they were being marched out. Forget when the police were being overrun. When they were being marched out versus Black Lives Matter protesters, the racial dimension was just staggering. And truthfully, just whenever there's really left-wing or progressive protests, I've been to more than I can count, and people who are I've never been in a situation where I'm part of an insurrection, but the police presence has never been like it was there. So there was just this sort of, I think, there was just this gentleness amidst a riot that was really strange and uncharacteristic coming from the police, which has as one layer a racial dimension, and another really is an ideological one. And then there's the issue that you're pointing out, which is even in some ways more profound and troubling, which is, was there actual collusion among members of the police or law enforcement who were part of defending the Capitol from the insurrectionists? And there's some reason to worry about that. For that particular situation, I think we're going to get a really hard examination, a real serious investigation, both by Congress and by the law enforcement agencies themselves. And I feel somewhat hopeful that that issues will be uncovered if they exist, and appropriate, people will be fired and jailed as appropriate. And if they do that, that'll have a powerful deterrent effect. We're seeing also the military suddenly taking this issue much more seriously and looking and beginning processes to look much harder at their own people to make sure they don't have effectively people who serving in the military whose objective is to not defend but undermine the Constitution. But then just to go back to the first piece of it, this bigger issue about racial disparity and handling protests and handling general population overall, that's obviously a tremendous national, deep challenge that requires a lot of work. And, we had a president who encouraged abuse by law enforcement, and so he got what he asked for. I think we have a president now who's going to be different. And some of the appointments at the Justice Department are really excellent in this regard. And I think we'll have a Justice Department that both sends a different kind of message from the deterrent side about what's going to be tolerable, but also actually works with police forces to get better and to reform. And I think if you do that in good faith, there's a lot of evidence that change policies have huge impact on police conduct. So I'm pretty hopeful about that dimension of this question. But the infiltration thing, we have to learn more, but it's a real concern for sure.
All right, let's go to Catherine now in Florida. Catherine, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
What's your question today?
My question is there a real possibility that Chuck Schumer will get rid of the filibuster or promise not to use it? Because it's, in my view, it's the only real leverage we have. Does he have the ability to do that?
That's a great question, and I'm going to let Lisa Gilbert take that one.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very live question right now, too. You're completely right. The filibuster is the thing that the minority party uses to block legislation, and there are some big things that we all want to achieve, and we know we need to achieve. Mitch McConnell, that's the reason he's fighting tooth and nail to try to keep it around as a tool. I would say there is real openness on the part of new Majority Leader Schumer to doing away with it. I think there are many people within the Dem caucus in the Senate that also want to, but not everyone yet. And so that's the hurdle we face, that, there are some Democratic senator institutionalists who believe in the filibuster and worry, what about the next time that they're in the minority? They might want to use the filibuster and it won't be there anymore. So, I think the way to achieve this is what I was describing earlier when talking about our democracy priority. When a couple of big, populist, important things that the caucus agrees upon are blocked using the filibuster by the minority, by Mitch McConnell, it will become very real very quickly to these senators that it has to be changed or we may not be able to move through our priorities. And I think in this moment of crisis, everyone agrees that we just can't wait. We need to move climate reform. We need to move COVID relief. We need democracy reform, among many other things. And we just can't let this procedural mechanism stand in the way anymore. So, it's a story that's still playing out, but I think the cards are aligned in a way that give us a real shot of doing away with the filibuster.
Great. Thanks so much. And we'll take one last question and then we'll wrap up. I thank you for hanging on the phone with us today on such important topics and for asking such great questions. Let's go to Margaret now. Margaret's in Bethesda, Maryland. Are you with us, Margaret?
Yes, hello. I feel as though history repeats itself because Mitch McConnell was the bane of my mother's existence, and it was all about campaign finance reform. And I feel that that is still the issue here that we haven't tackled. And the Citizens United business is at the heart of it. And I want to know if there isn't something that we can do about Citizens United, and what are we doing?
Thank you so much. It's a very important issue to us. And Rob, why don't you take that question?
Well, thank you, Margaret. And I hope that, thank you, Margaret. I hope that we can both not just satisfy you with our answer, but honor your mother with the work we have done, are doing, and will do. I'm going to give a little bit of a long answer, and then we can close the call. It's a great question, both because the democracy, money, and politics issue is so central, both to what Public Citizen does, but also to achieving so much of what we want, and because the advocacy approach that we take in this space, I think, is illustrative of what we're doing now and how we see there being possibilities of achieving great things for the country in the coming months and years ahead. So let me just first say, we're on a couple tracks, really multiple tracks in the democracy space. We want this new Biden administration to do what it can do through executive action to address money and politics. That includes first trying to undermine all these dark money organizations by requiring corporations to disclose what they're spending on politics. And in a variety of ways, there's things that the administration could do on its own to address that issue. So that's the first, the easiest, the least in some ways, but we hope to see that progress on that in the next few months. Then we want to get to the core of things by replacing the campaign finance system, which relies primarily on big donors and the super rich, and now increasingly is dominated by outside spending that is fueled by a very small number of people, like 100 people, who are responsible for 3/4 of individual spending by super PACs. 100 people, talk about oligarchy. We want to replace that system with one that relies on small donors and public financing. And that alternative campaign finance system is at the heart of what we were talking about, the For the People Act, which is known as H.R. 1 in the House and is now going to be known as S1 in the Senate, the For the People Act. So if we can get that passed, then we're going to replace the system where federal candidates rely primarily on big donors and make it one where they rely on small donors and matching public money. We think that would be totally transformative. It'd be transformative for who they spend time with, who they outreach to, what kind of issues they talk about, who runs for office, what kind of issues are considered possible to debate in Congress, and what ultimate policies we get adopted. So we do think it's really the gold standard. And then we also have to take on, which we can't just do through legislation, the Citizens United decision itself, which has to be overturned either by the court, which is not on track to happen anytime soon, or by constitutional amendment. We talked a little bit about the progress we've made in working for a constitutional amendment. That one is still going to take years to go, but we're really excited. We think now, majority support in both houses for a constitutional amendment, a big deal, not easy to achieve. And we think after Virginia acts, we'll be almost to 2/3 of the number of states we would need ready to pass a constitutional amendment. So we've made great progress, and we're not going to stop until we actually get the 28th Amendment adopted to overturn Citizens United and related decisions. Let me just say a quick thing. That's sort of what we're working on, what we think we can get done, and sort of the timetables that we think are realistic for winning. When it comes to this legislation, the For the People Act, it's obviously it has a story about how it evolved from which leaders in Congress were pushing on it. We have a great champion, John Sarbanes from Maryland, who's been the leader, and Speaker Pelosi is a big believer in it. I think new Majority Leader Schumer is also now firmly committed to this package. But a lot of the buildup for it came first from organizing around Citizens United and evidencing that people really cared passionately about too much money in politics and the issue. And then from the construction of a coalition that we spearhead called the Declaration for American Democracy. Lisa was really the central mover and shaker in putting that together. We, early in the Trump term, we convened a meeting of some core colleague organizations, a retreat for a few days, to say, look, our democracy is on its heels right now, but when we get rid of Trump, we'll have an opportunity to do things that are really far-reaching fixes. How do we prepare ourselves now for that moment? And we set about pulling together a big coalition that would work on as many democracy issues as we could package together. So it includes the money in politics issue, it includes voting rights reforms, it includes work on gerrymandering, it includes ethics issues and revolving door problems with members of Congress and so on. And we were able to construct the bill that is now the For the People Act, construct a coalition to back it, and then work with leadership to push it through the House, where it was passed in the last Congress. And now we're eager to do it both in the House again, but also force it through one way or another, with or without the filibuster, in the Senate. So I think that's really a tribute to this long-term organizing, and then to our effective coalition building, a lot of savvy work in terms of thinking about both effective policies, but also policies that we could frame right and that could resonate and get picked up in the Congress. And we're really poised for this transformative win. At the same time, we're still doing this work on the constitutional amendment, which I said is a years longer trajectory. And I very much like the story about what we've done on the amendment as well, because I know what happened the day we called for amendment, which was 11 years ago today, January 21, 2010, when the Supreme Court handed down the decision. And we said, anticipating that it was coming, we were prepared to call for an amendment. And so many of my friends, my actual friends and my organizational colleague friends, said, okay, of course an amendment is right on the merits, but that is just so far-reaching, so fanciful, why bother? And we made a decision then that we weren't going to engage in that argument with people. We were just going to go out and organize and prove to them that the reason to bother was that we were going to win. And we've been more successful at that than we could have ever hoped. We didn't start lobbying in Congress. We started organizing in cities and states across the country. We've now got 800 cities that have supported resolutions calling for a constitutional amendment. And as I said, we're on the verge of getting our 22nd state to do it. And in the course of doing all that deep organizing around the country, we built support in the Congress. So the first year after the decision was handed down, there were only 2 senators who supported a constitutional amendment. It just seemed too far out for everybody else. But then the next Congress, it got up to 26. And the next Congress after that, it got up to 54. And we actually had a vote on the floor of the Senate for a constitutional amendment. So it really reflected this commitment to organizing and not accepting people saying what couldn't be done, just figuring out what was the right thing to do and going out and doing it. And I'm proud of that as being part of what Public Citizen does. And I'm not just proud of it, I'm committed to it, and I'm sure that's how we make great and big change. And it's the kind of thing we're going to be doing going forward now in a much more hospitable environment now that Trump is off the scene. And we're excited about being able to work with all of you to make really big things happen. And as we wind down, let me just thank you again for all your support and all your engagement. When we talk about what it is that Public Citizen does and what we've done and what we've achieved, we mean all of us, not just the staff. We mean all of the membership, all of the supporters the things that we achieve, it's because of what we do together. It's because of the power that we build together. And it's made a difference for almost 50 years now, and it's going to make a really big difference in the months and years ahead. So thank you very much. Appreciate you spending the time with us, and we'll stay in touch. And I think with that, we're gonna call it. So thanks very much. Reach out to us if you need anything, by email or mail. As you know, we communicate with you frequently. We're always eager to have conversations, including these. And take care of yourselves. Be safe, and enjoy that fact that burden has been removed from your back with Trump out of office. Thank you, and good evening or good afternoon, depending on where we're talking to you. Take care.